Hi, welcome to Myles From Home, episode 3. Episode 3 tonight. Nice to have you with me. I'm David Myles, coming to you from Halifax, Nova Scotia, from my studio tonight. We have the amazing Jeremy Dutcher, who's going to be joining us. I look forward to many of you joining us. Hopefully I'll see your comments over here. Feel free to comment. Tell me where you're from. Tell me what's going on. It's nice to reconnect. I just came off vacation. I just came off 3 weeks at a beautiful lake in New Brunswick. I'm feeling good, feeling real good. I trimmed my beard. Hair's getting a little shaggy, but I put on a tie for the first time. Definitely, I would say in months. But I'm feeling good, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Remember, you can comment, and I'll be able to see them, and I'll do my best to respond. Jeremy's going to join us here in a little bit. You know, I've been thinking about big issues. I think everybody's been thinking about the big issues. I see it all around me. I see it on social media, especially people grappling with big issues, trying to figure out how to communicate clearly, figure out how they feel, and then figure out how to communicate clearly about how they feel and hopefully make a difference on these big issues. And it's hard. It's really important. It's really good. It's hard. It's hard to feel like you're doing justice to the topics you're addressing. And often it's done in the form of a tweet. It's done in the form of a Facebook post. It's short. You know, it's maybe a little bit longer. Maybe it's a little bit of a longer post, a little essay type post. Sometimes it's a speech by a politician or an activist or a community leader. All these statements on big issues. But, you know, when you look at, when you compare all these different methods of communicating big issues, nothing compares to the power of art. Artistic statements are our greatest social statements, because not only they make us think different, they make us feel different. They make us feel something. They often make us feel what it's like to be someone else, even for just a minute. But that feeling, when we start to feel like what it would be like to be someone else, that's the beginning of empathy. That's the beginning of real social change. That's why I say great works of art do that, because they're the ones that move the needle forward. They're the ones that cut through all that noise way more than any kind of tweet. And the reason I say all this is because Jeremy Dutcher did that. He did that. He continues to do it. He's going to do it again. I know it. He's that kind of artist. But with his first record, he did that. You listen to that first record, and you don't only hear something, you feel something. You don't only hear an album that was created about colonization and Indigenous voices. You feel colonization differently. You understand it more profoundly after you listen to that record. That is huge. It's so massive, and so rarely does art do that, but the best art does. And that's why I say what Jeremy Dutcher has created is so unbelievably important. If you haven't listened to the record, you have to go and listen to it. We're going to talk about the record lots tonight. But I think it's so cool because it's like a sleight of hand. You see, for years, Jeremy was working on this record. He was working in obscurity. People didn't know who Jeremy Dutcher was. He was a great musician. He had a vision for this project. And then he drops the project, and boom, the world takes note. Juno Award, Polaris Prize. But most importantly, moving the needle forward on understanding the importance of Indigenous voices, Indigenous culture in our country and all over the world. That is a huge, huge accomplishment. And again, it cut through the noise. Way bigger than any tweet, even the ones in all caps, my friends, even the ones in all caps. So I'm just saying that because I want to say how excited I am to talk to Jeremy. He's been one of my favorite artists for a while. I think he's an amazing person. And so I'm going to call him up. I'm going to call him up on Skype. I want to say hi to everybody who's watching. Heather, Dawn, Patrick Cox, Shell. I don't know who Bracktooth is, but you're coming from Montreal, and I like that. Love to see you all there. I'm looking forward to this chat with Jeremy. Oh, there we are. Heather Daly, wonderful to hear you. And of course, Indigenous language. And that's what we're going to talk a lot about with Jeremy. So let's bring Jeremy in here. Let's see if we can do this. You're coming from Montreal. Oh, you're watching it. There you
Hi,
go. How are you?
I'm so well. How are you doing?
Oh, it's nice to see you. And you can hear me fine?
I can hear you. It coming through like a bell. It's
You
perfect.
just look beautiful, Jeremy. You look
Oh,
beautiful.
thank you. Yeah, I showered just for this. I'm telling you.
First time in months to get out of
I mean,
quarantine and into the shower.
who am I looking good for, you know? It's just me in here. So yeah,
uh,
it's been a lot of lessons in selfhood
yeah, yeah, self
in these
care.
times, and yeah, trying to understand what it means um, to dip into a solitude that is uninterrupted. You know, this is, and as you know, this is so rare for people in our profession that we get extended periods of time where we're just sitting and able to expand on artistic ideas and really like dive into it.
Yeah, do you
Um,
consider yourself a pretty social? Are you an extrovert or introvert? Like, where do you fit on that scale?
it's kind of touring kind of changed me. I feel like before I was doing that, it like I was telling the story of an extrovert who maybe actually wasn't one, you know. You know, just based on I guess just the social setting around me. I feel like um I stepped into a role of sociality that was maybe beyond myself, and now that I can construct a world that I choose, I think it's a little more close to home and a little more solitary and a little more, just my family around me
Yeah,
and just the people. Um, you have to. Anyway, I draw a smaller circle these days, but with pleasure I do that. You know,
right. It
it's
feels good.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
that's great. You know, it's been a theme. It's been a bit of a theme. I talked with Matt Mays, and Matt Mays, I don't know if you've seen him. I mean, he's a really gregarious performer, really
yeah.
outgoing. And he said much the same thing was that, the perception is that he's actually really outgoing. And for a long time, he kind of thought he was. But at the same time, he's kind of thinking during this time. And also, just as he toured more and more, he realized that he was actually quite introverted and needed that time to pull in.
I think it becomes a balancing act too, right? I think because we're in the business of extroversion,
Yeah, yeah,
in
yeah, that's
going
right.
and doing shows and inviting people into our heart for an evening, but over and over and over again, I feel like there's a bearing of self that doesn't wearing down is such the wrong way that I'm trying to express this, but you know what I'm saying? It like after a while, there's a certain sense of balance that needs to be reconciled, you
Yeah.
know? And I think for me, yeah, this time has been that like, because I was going for like 3 years as soon as this record came out, like on tour, oh, like
I
so
was
busy.
watching it and going, wow, it was
Oh,
an
almost
intense
like,
run.
yeah, it was unfathomable almost. And I just like, I was like, just ride it out until it,
Right.
you never know, like, longevity for me is never assumed. I had a very particular, this music that I released came out in a very particular cultural moment that allowed me to speak into something that I think was bigger than myself or what I had created, and I think I wanted to speak into that void and hold that space in a responsible way. And I think there hasn't been many of us, so much to say, out
Mhm.
there in the public sphere, saying stuff, with the notable exceptions of, of course, Buffy Sainte Marie or like a Tribe Called Red or Tanya Tagaq. It's like there hasn't been many of us.
Yeah.
So there's a sense of wanting to hold that space in a way that honors the community that you come from. And I think Yeah, certainly I wanted to bring to light with this first record a sense of urgency around our language, because we're right now in kind of the fight of our life right now to preserve our language and to make sure that it's going to last even the next generation. We've had this huge shift, like it's a total 180 in the last couple generations, where when my mom was growing up, it was like that was the language of every day. It's like the first language she knew. And now we have a scenario where we have less than 100 fluent speakers left. And so, this happens very quickly, and it's not by chance that it happens too. We need to look at the things like the residential school
Or
system and the way that
by design. It was by design.
for sure,
Yeah.
and so and I think, if we can change that story that quickly by design, we can also redesign ourselves
Yeah.
out of it
Yeah,
too,
man.
right? And I'm a really big advocate for that. And of course we need to be highlighting the issues and the problems, but also, yeah, bringing the solutions to the table and thinking about, um, yeah, where we're off to. Because I think, hey, I was just talking about this today with a friend. That record for me, when I wrote it, I was creating it with a sense of like future, in like I created it in the future. You know what I'm saying? Is like
A future you
I
wanted to see.
exactly.
Yeah.
I created that record in a world where our languages were on the radio, our languages
Yeah.
were, on street signs. It was there was no translation needed, because it was just, um, people had a literacy in Woollerstook music that I kind of just assumed that they had, or I dreamed them to have,
Yeah, I love it.
even if they had no perception of what actually our music even sounds like, or what our languages even sound like, or any of that, because not many people had known about us before. So I think I hope it opened up a lot of people's hearts to understand that we're not all just one thing. We have very particular ways of doing things, and how I represent my contemporary indigeneity is very different from how the guys in a Tribe Called Red are going to do it, or how artists like Ken Monkman or something are going to do it, right? Like there's all these different uh
I think that's just so interesting. I didn't expect to get into this right away, and I love it.
yeah.
I'm glad we did, because I think I've noticed this a lot, and I find it actually happens as much on the so-called progressive side. Sometimes is this kind of treatment of a monolithic kind of culture, like there's
Right.
there's one indigenous voice,
Right.
there, and it's just and it's always struck me as being interesting, because and harmful, really harmful, because any knowledge of anyone, of any group of people, you come to realize that there's great diversity
Of
in
course.
any population, let alone a population as diverse as the indigenous population in Canada.
And it's like in that diversity, that's where the beauty lies. That's where the real, that's where the meat
Yeah,
is.
right, 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 right.
It's like the kind of like, maybe more homogenized culture that we might go to a powwow and see. It's a beautiful expression, and it's one that's been able to keep our cultures alive and in our minds,
Yep.
in our very much present in our lives, and that's a very important way of gathering. And yet, there's so many distinct cultural expressions that you don't see at a powwow, and that are very much rooted. Mine was very much rooted in a sort of like, in a research kind of, anthropological, more like, that kind of context. But everyone's using, their everyone's, I guess, encountering their identity in a different way with regards to how it relates to their artwork, right? And
Yeah.
so for some people it's not even a consideration. They might be, um very indigenous, and yet their work speaks nothing to
Yeah.
that. And I think that's what, as soon as we can include that in indigenous music, then I'll be satisfied,
Yeah, man.
because I think
It was literally, it was one thing I kind of was thinking of, is that I have been actually, even in explaining this, and when I talk about you, I actually feel it's kind of limiting to say Indigenous artist Jeremy Dutcher. I don't say that. I don't want to say that. Doesn't feel right. I want to say artist Jeremy Dutcher. You know what I mean? Though you refer to your Indigenous identity, is super important in what you do.
I mean, yeah.
Is it the, of course it's not. And as you said, when we can kind of accept all versions of what Indigenous people are creating, whether it be, as you said, a more of what we expect, or something that's
Yeah,
straight up hip hop. You know what I mean? Straight up, totally
totally.
different. It's more influenced by Tupac than it is by traditional Indigenous culture. That's legit too.
Totally. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I love that. And I think that's the richest that I hope that we can get to. And that's why, like, things like the with the Junos, they have this like one category of like indigenous
Yeah.
music, and it's like, well, this is kind of the only category that's grouped together by a culture,
Right.
know.
Right.
And lots of other artists get considered in all these different categories, like, best album or like all these kind of things. And so often I think our artists get sideloaded into like indigenous music, right? And
Yeah.
like, because that's from the cultural place that we're creating from, that then becomes the most important thing about it, which I see these like an award like that as a very important placeholder, or like a space taker
Yeah.
in these institutions, and I'm very grateful for those people that advocated for these space holders to take place. And yet I think we're at a moment now where I hope that we can grow beyond that, and and
Amen.
and and understand that in what indigenous creators are doing right now is the music of this time, and it's very it's very it's speaking to something that I hope as a country we can all kind of look at and grapple with right now, and it seems
Yeah.
like we are.
I
And I
think
think,
so. I mean, I think it actually is a similar trajectory to hip hop. Hip hop was a category, for a long time it wasn't a category, then it was a category, and then it moves beyond. Whereas, like, you get the biggest songs of the country of the year, they weren't considered in that category because for a long time they were just hip hop songs. You know what I mean? But now it's moved beyond, and I think a lot of it has to do with value, where we place value, right? And I think that's what's really happening, I hope. But especially with with all this art, like, the renaissance that we're watching, people are starting to finally understand the value in, as you said, that richness, all of that, the little differences, the languages that were almost gone. They were
Mhm.
almost gone. I mean, I think about like the backpacking culture a lot. I think about this. I think about the backpack people who travel to the highest, farthest places in Thailand to find remote communities. Do you know what I mean? And they
Yeah.
and they brag about it. And it's like, I found a community that's only 100 people speak this language. And in New Brunswick, we have
Right,
communities like
right next
it's
door,
right
your
there. You don't have to
neighbors.
go to Thailand, dude. Go across the river. Like,
Yeah, and I think that what I've been encouraged by in this last like couple of years, I guess, like getting to do this project and speak about indigenous language and the precarity of it, but also the reemergence and resurgence of it, is like, getting to talk to allies and people that, um, might not have any business learning our language, but I think they understand it. They have this idea that, like, why, I could go learn, any language in the world, and yet, there's something about being able to relate to the people that have been here for thousands and thousands and
amazing.
thousands of years, and that have a knowledge of this land and this place that is embedded in the language and runs so deep, and so
Right.
I think a lot of allies are like looking to that and realizing that, and seeing that, that work of linguistic revitalization can be everybody's work,
Yeah.
because all the resources are out there. Trust and believe. I think we're in this amazing digital age right now where information is so readily available, not just for our people, but for everybody, about our culture and our languages and how they work. And I think that's a really exciting moment for us as people that really want to see it survive. Because
Yeah.
just even like up until 30 years ago, we didn't even have a writing system. And so,
Wow.
yeah, just in that short time, we've come to like this really critical moment where it's like, okay, we take one path or the other. It's
Right.
like we either put our real focus and energy into saving this language, or it's what, like, we just let it die.
Right.
And it's not words that die. it's worldview,
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
and one that is so distinct to this place, you know, like I'm saying, you know, and this kind of came home to me when I was studying. So I went to opera school. I was studying as a classical singer for a little while. And when you go to these kind of schools, they really encourage you to take a European language, you know, because often these operas are in Italian or
Yeah.
German or French or something, you know. And anyway, so I was focusing on German leader, and so I was into taking German, and you know, I was studying for one of these tests, and you know, these like I don't know how familiar you are with it, but they have this like long words, you know. So
Oh,
trying to
yeah.
like cram these long words into my head, and
Compound words. It's like a million
yeah, you
compound
know,
words in one. Yeah.
the funny part is that Willistook works the same way. We have
Okay.
the exact same compound word system. But anyway, I digress. But you know, it was in that moment of like trying to like fit these words in my head, and just woke up and said, you know, there's a whole country of people that speak that language. It'll be fine. You know,
Yeah.
this language only lives here. You know, and so there's something to that. And I think since that day, I've been, you know, it's what's on my mind when I wake up. It's what's on my mind when I go to bed. And honestly, I probably spend more time doing language work than music work these
Really?
days.
I got
Yeah.
it's
Oh yeah.
so fascinating. I gotta move. I gotta go back. I gotta go back
Okay.
because where, like, let's talk about your upbringing. Let's talk about your parents. Let's talk
Yes.
about your parents. Where did this desire, where did this interest in learning the language, the culture, all of this, and the worldview? It's so, I find it so interesting because at one point, as you say, it's kind of, you're looking really inwards. You're looking at
Mhm.
something small, microscopic, very local, but you have such an amazing, expansive worldview, and I'm guessing it came from your parents. It
I think
often
so.
does.
Yeah. Sweet Stephen and Lisa Dutcher. They are just so lovely. I love them so. Um, they so my mother was a nurse for a really long time in community. So right in Fredericton at St. Mary's First Nation,
Okay.
she was the community healthcare worker there for a long time, and then she like moved to academia. She was teaching at UNB. Um,
Okay.
in their nursing program there, like trying to get Indigenous nurses like on board and like getting them into the nursing program. And my father, he also taught at UNB. He was like a history prof. So he taught Canadian Native relations, but he's white. So there's this really interesting encounter within my household of this like, you know, I always like kind of laugh at these like terms like reconciliation. Well, it's like, okay, well, I've been living that my whole life, you know. The story of Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canada coming together is my life, you know.
Wow.
So you know, I think that really shaped my perspective, I think, and how I came to think about, you know, identity. And I think the ways in which, yeah, community is codified within like contemporary Indigenous communities. The reserve system has been such a uh, particular thing, right? Because it's really created this divide within our people of people living on reserve and people living
Yeah.
off reserve,
Yeah.
right? And so, and I kind of was halfway between. So like we would do. My parents really wanted to school us down in the city, and so we would do like you know, did my schooling in Fredericton, and then in the summer we would go up to Nigulkuk or Tobic, where my mom comes from.
Okay.
Um, but you know, so I had this sense of
You
like
were constantly bouncing between the two worlds.
which is like, so you get very and in a sense you feel like, oh, I don't really fit in many places, you know. But later in life you sort of come to understand that as a very as a sacred perspective, you know, as a powerful place to be on that fence, you know, and able to see both perspectives in maybe a clear light. Anyway, so I guess you know, even though we were spending a lot of time off reserve, my mom was very she made it very clear that that we needed to know who we were, you know. And I think she really from a young age emphasized that our culture was a very important thing, you know, and that we had space to express its importance in our family, you know. So
Did
we
she
were
speak the
involved in,
language? Did she speak the language at home?
yeah, so like we were like like coming up, it was like mostly English, just because my father,
Yeah.
and like we were speaking at home, and then like when we would go and visit my grandmother, she would speak with her. And then like getting to hear her talk with her sisters and her aunt, and so there was always like, even from a very young age, there was this sense like, oh, something's going on, like we're not talking how we usually talk, and it wasn't until later, and there were like commands like, go get this or whatever, come inside, or all these kind of like maybe short commands. But I wouldn't describe myself as being like a fluent speaker when I was a kid, just because it was more of a casual language or something that I heard around me. But it also made it, because I had heard it around me, it made it super easy when I sort of started. It was in college, actually, right after this sort of like German test epiphany of like, okay, that's it. I'm buckling down. Like every day is dedicated to gaining a level of fluency that I know will help me in the work that I need to do to keep this language alive.
Right.
Because like there's just no resources is the problem. Right now we have 4 books in our language,
Okay.
total.
Wow.
That's it.
Yeah.
And one of them is the Bible. So
Yeah.
it's like there's such a limited scope of what language learners right now have at their disposal to learn. And so for me, the work of my positionality, because I have that access to higher education, I have that access to understanding the language, being around the language, and an increasingly deeper understanding of it written too. Because there's this, I'm having this beautiful thing with my mother right now, because she grew up, this was her first language. But she was growing up at a time when they didn't have a writing system. And so she speaks it, and understands it very clearly, but doesn't necessarily, is just learning now to put it to paper. Whereas for me, I very much learned from from a book and from a paper way.
Okay.
And so now I get to go back, and she's helping me with my pronunciation. I help her with the writing system. And it's like this, it's a really beautiful way to do it,
And did during in these academic environments, high school, university, was there any curiosity about your identity? Was there ever anybody say, it's kind of cool that this other language that you're exposed? There was no interest.
I mean, New Brunswick, I wouldn't exactly call it a hotbed of diversity.
Right.
So I think, I wasn't necessarily worried that they weren't talking about it. I was just happy that they weren't making fun of me for it.
Right.
And, I had a couple other things that they could make fun of me for. So they were looking over here and not looking at this. And I thought that was fine. But, I think, for me, it was kind of this like thing that, we just didn't talk about. And, we would go at the end of a, school day or on the weekend to the Friendship Center, in the city where like Native people gather. And we would have drum group there, and we'd be singing and feasting and all this kind of stuff. It was community. But then, you go to school, and because even too, there's this distinction, because this is the reserve kind of system and thinking, where it's like, because I don't come from St. Mary's, I don't hang with the St. Mary's kids.
Yeah.
And so like, there's this like distinction between like, even within ourselves, of like groupings, and like, oh, you're not with us, oh, you're not from the reserve, or you're not this, right? And so I guess I just like I looked inward and like looked within my family, and there were some really key knowledge keepers that surrounded me as I was growing up, like my siblings, and this woman who became a really important mentor to me, named Maggie Paul. And so I took strength from them, and I guess I let my identity flourish in those spaces, rather than, I don't, to be honest, like in my high school, like, or even in like the Fredericton area, I didn't know a lot of Native people, or like a lot of my age, young ones. I was always talking to the elders, the old people,
Hanging
because
old.
they
You were hanging
they
old.
had all the knowledge, they had the life experience, they had the
cool.
language, they had the dances and the songs, and so for me that was always like, I didn't socialize with a lot of people my age. I was always like talking to the older ones, you know?
So interesting. And you're the youngest. Are you the youngest of four in your
Yeah,
family? I love.
yeah.
So you know I am too. I'm the youngest of four boys.
It's amazing.
Wild.
We're such a special place in the order of things, you know?
Yeah.
The baby.
That's right. That's right. That's
I
so
love it. I
cool.
love it. And so are your siblings all musicians too, or
They all
what's the
play
situation?
music.
Oh,
they all play music. They do other things professionally now, but they're all great musicians.
you're the one who hung on to the dream, eh?
That's right. I think that's part of
Beautiful.
being the youngest. You take big risks because they kind of, my parents were strict, so the first ones were, it was bigger risk for them to say, oh, I'm going to be an artist. You know what I mean? By the
Right.
time I came around, they're like, okay, just,
Do, do whatever you
yeah,
want. Just be happy.
yeah, almost. But
Just bring
I want to talk about Maggie Paul a bit
Okay.
because I've heard about her. You've spoken about her. I read about her. Tell me a little bit about Maggie Paul.
Oh God, I can't shut up about her. My God, I love her so much. So Maggie Paul is a song carrier, and she doesn't actually come from the Wolastoq people. She comes from the Passamaquoddy people, and the Passamaquoddy are a nation in actually on the state side, so they're in Maine. So the whole thing is like we didn't cross the border
Yeah,
crossed
yeah,
us,
yeah,
right?
of
And so we
course.
have these territorial distinctions between like Canada and you know America. It doesn't really work like that
Yeah.
for us in our way of thinking, right? So she, because, and why I make this distinction is because we speak the same language too, right? And so Passamaquoddy and Wolastoq are the same language, essentially the same culture, but they were split by the border,
Okay.
and then they took very different histories, right? Anyway, so she is from that side, but came over and lived on this side. So she's been living in Fredericton at St. Mary's First Nation for um, since I think the 70s. So she's been a well-known elder in the Fredericton area, and is just has one of the most. Whew, wow, how do I speak about this voice in a way that is uh, it is I don't know. I love the human voice. I think it is one of the like most beautiful creations of all. And I think there have been a couple human voices in my life that have shook me in a way that I was changed afterwards. I see. I'm sure you've experienced this too. I
Mhm.
think everyone who loves music or anyone who loves sound, I think, has been shaken by a certain kind of sound. Anyway, her voice, I've never heard another voice like this. It's just it is for me. I always joke like it takes me a while to get to Spirit Place, you know, but as soon as she opens her mouth, she's right there, you know, and it's
The
like,
gateway,
you
direct
know,
gateway.
and it's
Wow.
like fuck, I need a whole show to get there, but she is like there's just such a way in which she carries her voice that is really beautiful. Anyway, so she is she's just an elder among our people, and she kind of took me under her wing. She's a sweat lodge keeper, and so she has a lot of ceremonial songs too, and so she invited me in her lodge and taught me a lot of songs, but also told me about lots of different stuff. And one of those things was these wax cylinders that actually became the
Okay.
catalyst to the album, right? And so I didn't actually know anything about that collection that lived at the museum until she told me about them. She said, "Hey, you know," because she had gone and done some of the work before, you know, she had gone and looked at one of the songs and brought it back, but she didn't have the time or the resources to sit down and do all the full like scope of the work, you know.
And so
So
these, you just take the little where these songs were recorded.
so these were recorded among our ancestors in the like early 1900s, so like 1903 to 1911.
Yeah.
There was this anthropologist who went out and he lived among our ancestors and collected, you know, he collected all sorts of stuff. So it wasn't just the songs, but he also collected stories and photographs and all kinds of things. But particularly for me, as a musician, I was really curious about these songs, you know, and he collected over 100 of these traditional songs on these wax cylinders. And so this is like proto recording technology. This is before we had records. We were recording on these little, like, kind of like a pop can hollowed out of wax, and then it etches onto that cylinder the sound waves, and
And
then
then
you
they
can read it back.
spin. Is that how it
You've
works?
seen it? Yeah, you've
Yeah.
probably seen it before. It's so brilliant.
So
Uh,
cool.
yeah, so I got a chance to go so in Gatineau at the Canadian, oh, what do we call it now? The Canadian Museum of History, I believe it's called, in Gatineau. I went there for a couple weeks and sat with the collection, and was just so blown away, like beside myself with these like beautiful melodies. And so Maggie is a huge part of that journey, and
Wow.
and she really pointed me in that direction. It's like, and she did it in such the way that, like, this is so how our elders do it. They, like, when a young person comes and sits with them often, it's not about ever really telling that person what to do. But what Maggie said was, like, she told me about this collection and this archive, and she said, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if somebody brought that back? Wouldn't it be nice if somebody went into that museum and brought it out for the people? Because she said, that's where it needs to be. It needs to be back with the people. And so,
That's wisdom.
I can
That's
take a hint.
wisdom. That's wisdom. That's wisdom. That's what it sounds like.
And so for me, this whole album and the expression of it was just, in a way, to satisfy that request from Maggie, because her whole intention was to bring that back to the people. And now we got those songs and those melodies, on radio in the East Coast. Now we got our little kids learning it in the schools, and it's been really exciting to see the many manifestations in which this work has now begun to live,
That's very
within the
interesting.
community.
So these songs have taken on a life outside of just your project.
Totally,
It's been
yeah,
very
absolutely,
interesting. So
yeah.
at what age did you meet her and start having these conversations about songs?
Oh gosh, I think I would have been. She's kind of been around my whole life. There's pictures of us when, I was maybe, 5 or 8
Wow.
or 10 or so. She's always kind of been around. But we sort of took on a more sort of intentional mentor
Yeah.
relationship in the last, 10 years or something, and so it's just been a matter of sitting with her and getting to hear the journey of our, it was really just, it started with just sitting with her and asking tons of questions, because, I was so curious about her, just, whatever, like, well, we'll get to talking about, like, the music, but even just her journey
Yeah.
from, from over in the States and how she came here, and, when she, how she picked up the drum. And because, we're in a very particular cultural moment when it comes to, like, Indigenous issues or Indigenous identity. I think a lot about, my mother's generation, but also even above that, that elder generation. It was not cool or popular to be Indigenous. It was not something interesting that people want to talk about at a
Yeah.
party. It
Right.
was something that you hid, and it was something that was potentially unsafe if people knew about it, right? And so, I always lay down my, like, sincerest humility at the feet of these people, because I think within the survival of our elders is the story of survival of, oh my God, humanity the world over. Like, they've been out here and they've been doing it and keeping our culture and language alive,
Yeah.
so that we that
Under
are in a
under
strong
crazy
place
under
can pass
crazy
it on.
circumstances. Under
Yeah,
wild circumstances, of course.
Yeah, and then so our generation is now sitting. We've kind of been the first ones, because the last residential school closed in 1996,
Yeah.
like in my lifetime, and so thankfully I didn't have to go to one, but it was a close miss,
Yeah. Right.
and I think we are part of that first generation that is not directly steeped in the trauma of colonization,
Mhm.
Of course it's still around us, and we still have to, I'm thinking about, Chantel Moore and Rodney Levi, those two killings that happened in New Brunswick just last month, you know. And yet I think there's this general sense that we have moved into a place where our lives aren't necessarily in danger all the time, and I think even that is a place of, like, we can take that moment to celebrate, and then also move forward from that, and think about all these amazing Indigenous young creators that are just um, doing so many beautiful things. And it's just so amazing to see how, one project spawns another one.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you how many, people after shows and stuff come up to me and say, the work you're doing with your, like, archive and those ancestor songs, what you're doing, like, I want to go and do that with my.
Yeah, because they have a whole other set of songs. They're
Exactly,
from a
it's
different
not just,
community.
that's the thing,
Yeah,
it's like coast to coast to coast to
of
coast. Like,
course.
all of our material culture is sitting in these institutions, and for me, I think I had hoped that this work, as much as it talks about language, I think it's also talking about the nature of museums, and the acts of repatriation, and what that could actually look like, and getting um, these material cultures back into the hands of the people in which they come from.
Yeah.
You know.
I think one of the really interesting things, and we're, to get into the musical side of what you did, which was not taking these melodies, taking these these recordings, and then reharmonizing, doing what you did, which was orchestrating, reharmonizing, singing them yourself, using the audio. It was just such an amazing. I was so moved. And I'll speak out. Firstly, is that you had spoken to me before you had done this project and kind of outlined the vision. And this was over the phone. We didn't know each other at all. We were just having a chat about a project, and you outlined the vision, and it was so grand and so beautiful and ambitious. Honestly, my first thought was, great idea. Good luck, like, first album. It
Yeah.
doesn't happen. First album, that doesn't happen. And then I hear it, and I was in my backyard with my wife listening to it, crying, going, I've never heard anything. It was so beautifully executed.
Oh.
But one of the things I think was so cool is that, and speaking of museums, is this term that we use, primitive, right? I wanted to talk about this because it's a loaded, it's a term that I think forever museums and musicians and you worked it right into the classical world, right into the heart of it, right? Where
Mhm.
those melodic ideas for so long, Indigenous artistic contribution would always come with the other term, would be considered primitive. It was, well, there's Beethoven, and then there's
Right.
this. You just flipped it right over. You just, like, suplex, screw that,
Yeah.
and I thought that was so powerful. You know what I mean? Just like that. And I mean, I think this is, again, it's this reevaluation, but that is it's a term that still pops up every once in a while in museums and this, and
Mhm.
looking back at these cultures. And I want to talk about that a little bit, because I
Yeah.
think it's a really interesting thing.
I mean, I think it's really important how we name. I think naming and language is so powerful, and I think yeah, things like primitive, but even terms like, to be honest, like the ways that this music has been characterized as world music, I
Yeah,
think
right.
is like it particularly falls under a category of, like, okay, it's just confusing to me because all music is music in the world, and it's I guess because it's not in English, or not necessarily for, like, a white mainstream audience. I guess, like, it's considered something other, but I guess it just, like, all that's doing is just pointing us to power, right? And to I guess who's in the rooms making the decisions about what gets called what,
That's right.
right?
That's exactly it.
Yeah. And so I guess what I hope is that we can start to democratize those powers, and have our people in the room and having these discussions, because trust and believe that we're not calling ourselves primitive.
Of course
There's
not.
nothing, it's like, this is there's a real intentionality. And I guess for me, that's I struggle with this dichotomy my whole I guess like really conscious life, right? Because coming, I guess I started a classical music program when I was 17, and came out when I was maybe 21, and then started writing. Actually, I started writing this record when I was in school, and so
Wow.
really this was kind of a response, or like kind of a, what do you call this, like a a shrug off of the classical music convention, and even like, even the ways that we talk about classical music, like who's classic, like who's, how are we codifying that, like who gets to decide what that entails. Like for me, I think there's a strong case to, call it Western art music, because that's what it is,
Yeah.
and I think there's lots of music of the classical period of many different cultures that I think once we start to level that playing field a little bit and start to, I mean, if you oh God, I mean, if you really extrapolate it out, it could be just a conversation about white supremacy too, if I'm being
No,
frank.
but that's, I mean, it is essentially by saying this is here and this is, and by,
Yeah,
because primitive is a normative, it's a term that is meant to demean,
right,
right? It's
right.
meant to say that it's not of the same refinement. This melody, this artistic contribution
Yeah.
is not of the level of refinement as this. Well, what's the difference? Well, it comes from two different groups of people.
Which
That's
for me is like, I think of as laughable, because I think about, all the care that is taken within Indigenous communities of that mentor student
yeah,
relationship, and just how, um to really learn a melody correctly, it takes years,
yeah,
you
right.
know and that is like, that is a kind of embodiment, and I think what's beautiful about our singing tradition too is like, music is done as a form of action too, right? Like we sing the canoe song as we're in the canoe going down the river. We sing the corn planting song as we're planting the seeds for the corn. It's like, it's all related to these various activities, and so I think there's an embodiment too, that we don't respect when we start to talk about, pedigree or quality,
Yeah,
that I think we miss. And so I think for me, all I was doing was just putting that, like leveling that playing field, and this, like starting that conversation from a place where, both are honored, and it's not about how, the tools of Western art music can decorate Indigenous melody. It's about how Indigenous thought form and music creation continuum, which goes back a real long time, how that can, be in conversation
yeah, yeah.
with, the instruments of an orchestra, which I believe are very beautiful. And I don't sell out this way of making music at all. I think, um, there's so much beauty in that canon of music, and yet when we choose to value only certain kinds of sound making, we lose.
That's
And
right.
so
We lose.
just
You
to
did
stop
it.
losing,
Yeah,
David.
that's right.
Stop losing.
Yes, it's true. We lose, right? That's what I mean. That's what I think was so cool about this is it was like a sleight of hand. It
Hmm.
was like a side. I listened to that record and I'm like, it was a sleight of hand. It was a sleight of hand that turned this whole thing without ever saying anything by doing this, by going, whew, and interweaving these two worlds as equal partners, as partners in this, as you said, musical partners in this, not as a sub. There's no that really changed the conversation. I think just from a perspective, from the classical perspective, from a musician's perspective, from how it fits into the canon. And what was so interesting is that I think you were, as you said, there's a moment where people have started to go like this. They have those class. You played to classical audiences all over the world.
The
Did you
world, yeah.
did you find the resistance or did you find acceptance?
No, like fully, just. I mean, I think there's a strangeness to what I offer, which I think makes people go, huh. But I don't mind that so much. I don't mind, as long as they're not booing me off the stage. But no, I think the world over, I've gotten really positive responses from classical audiences, and I've gotten to collaborate with people like Yo-Yo
Oh,
Ma,
dude,
which
I'm
I
gonna show the audience. I got the picture ready so we can show the audience, buddy. Look at this.
oh my
Remember the one
God,
I sent you?
yeah,
Here, the audience is gonna see a picture. There you are, you and Yo-Yo Ma. You can't see it, but that's a beautiful photo. And then,
I'm sure it's stunning.
oh,
I don't
it's
know which one it
amazing.
is, but I'm
And then
sure
there's another one of you guys. A little look at this, and Yo-Yo Ma tapping you on the back, giving you some love. You
we're
know,
buds, man.
really?
It's yeah, it was like a real coming together. I think whatever. I'm not gonna like pretend to sit here and like be friends with Yo-Yo Ma, but what I will say is that I think I was shocked with just how um, absolutely comfortable I was in his presence. I thought that there might be this, just of course who he is and like his legacy and everything he's done in his career. I thought, well, okay, so I think fame or this stardom or whatever this does, it's an amplifier, right? And so people go one of two ways, I guess, or really is just turning up the volume on whatever was existing. And I think something that interacting with Yo-Yo showed me was that, like, it's there's so much beauty in going that positive way, in really taking the time to thank every person who's holding a door for you,
Right.
taking the time to talk to the people that are cleaning the change room. It's taking the time to talk to people after the show. There's just, I was astonished that somebody of his, of what one might think of as, this virtuosic artist that wouldn't make time for people is just one of the most friendliest people that I've ever gotten a chance to meet.
Wow.
And I was so instantly comfortable in his presence.
Wow. And he was totally open. He was picking up what you were putting down.
Oh my God, like in a real way. Like, so the first collaboration that we got to do was part of the Bach Festival here in Montreal. And so he did, oh my God, 3 hours of the entire Bach cello suite. Um, and then
By
as part of the
memory.
oh my God, it
Yeah.
was like you could hear a pin drop. It was
Wow.
incredible. And then at the end of this show, like all along the tour, he was asking like local artists to come in and collaborate on the final piece. And so this was why I had come. He had asked me to come and sing honor song and he would accompany. And it was all improvised too. He's like, of course, I mean, yeah,
Wow.
Yo-Yo Ma, he's a wizard. Um, and so that was the first time that we get to collaborate. But then at the end of that tour, he brought together some of his favorite collaborations from that tour, and so I got to go into studio with him as well, and record something. Although I don't know if it's like what's happening with it now. I don't know if it's gonna come. Anyway, there was a recording session. I don't know what's happening with it. We ate sushi together. It was really fun. I don't
Wow.
know. It
Wow.
was. We were in the not the Hamptons, but it was somewhere in Massachusetts part
Oh
of
yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Yeah, in like and there was this old church that was converted to a recording studio, and anyway, blah blah blah, Yo-Yo Ma.
That's pretty cool though.
Uh,
But it does show the level of, where the album took you really through that
oh my
world.
God.
And
Yeah.
playing at all these indie rock festivals at the same time. To be noted, it wasn't just a classical by any stretch resonating just with the classical audiences. It was
That was
everywhere.
the funniest joke for me, is that I got to like play that card on everybody, is like I got to play everywhere.
Yeah.
I was playing concert halls and some of the most beautiful venues, like the Four Seasons and stuff, and at the same time I was playing like dingy festivals, and some of them were really nice and others were not, and sometimes we were piling into vans, and it was like, because I guess I was at this intersection of like kind of pop, kind of classical, kind of indigenous, kind of whatever that is, I got away with a lot. And I think that for me was like, it was a fun sense of freedom, and it allowed me to speak to a lot of people, which was really exciting,
So
because I
powerful.
think, Yeah, these conversations are not one that have been fostered in this country. I think is the simplest way to put
Yeah,
that, is just like we haven't been having these conversations up until quite recently.
that's right.
And so, and it's like, it feels like friggin' 10 steps forward and 9 steps backwards sometimes. Um, yeah. Oh.
Yeah,
Did
of
you know?
course, of course.
Yeah. Anyway, so I just I'm very hopeful, I guess, for this project. Doing this work and this project made me hopeful, because all the people that came around and to witness it and to come to shows and to be part of the community that surrounds this work, um, it was way it was a way different crowd than I thought it would be.
Yeah,
It was, it was like old people, young people, queer people, not queer people, every race, creed,
right.
religion, whatever. It's like, I think there's a certain magic to non-English music too, or in the way that, like, maybe if people, when we separate a literal understanding of
Yeah.
something and we zoom into a vibrational understanding and like how it affects us and how sound sits on and in our body, I think that I think has it bypasses all this, and I
Yeah.
think becomes a tool for healing. And I think um, I was very happy to see it do that work.
I think it did. I,
I had
I,
hoped it would.
I do think it did. I mean, that's what I was trying to get at the beginning. Is I do it. I really do, and it manifests itself slowly, and the effect will be over time and everything. But I do think that it made them it moved people in a fundamental way, in a changing their understanding of really important things. A lot of what we've been
It's
talking about.
because it's stories, right? And stories is what moves people. And I think for a long time, our stories, like Indigenous stories, had been mediated by somebody else. They had
Yeah.
been, for God's sakes, like, all of these like Western films, and pretty much for the early part of Hollywood, they got Italians to play us. Like,
Yeah.
we didn't even get to play Indians in our own friggin'
Right.
movies. And so right now we are just coming to this place where we're now having real Indigenous voices at served up to us. And I think it's a real moment right now where we can choose a different path. We have a lot of prophecies and stories in our culture about the path that we are to take together, because trust and believe, like all of this, the Indigenous non-Indigenous relationship, this is all supposed to happen.
Yeah. Right.
And I think, we had 500 years ago we had a choice, and I don't think we chose right. I really don't. And I think this put us down a path of fear and dividedness and individualism that I think is like the ultimate manifestation in Donald Trump, but like is playing out at all sectors of society all the time. That choice, and I
The
think,
choice
right.
being, sorry, do you mean the choice of colonization?
I guess, yeah, the choice of colonization. I guess the choice of fear over kinship
Yeah.
and love, and I think that played out from either side. But obviously, I think there is a power story and a domination story that also took place here, and I think that that really got in the way of the potentiality of that story that we could have told, which is one of relationship and one of
Yeah.
of mutual respect and
Collaboration.
yeah. And I think there's
Yeah.
there's such there's such uh, there's such fruitful um, there's such fruitfulness there at that place of collaborative and of moving together, and I just hope that we can take this time to look and transform our own ways of doing things, because trust and believe, it's all of us, right? Like it's in all of our ways of collecting and communicating with each other. And I want to give props to you, my brother, for using your platform to
Oh,
to
I
I
find
mean, I
this
have to say it.
it
There's not there's
it
that
enriches. It's like you said, it just makes it better. It makes my life. It's These are the conversations I live for. My
right.
life is only made better by different by experiencing the lives of other people, and the more different the better. I've always believed that.
But
And
my brother, you as a white dude to go and say this is a transformational message, right? Because there have been generations of people just like you that did not see it this way. And I think you like whatever, I can reach who I can reach and I can talk to who I want to talk to. And yet, you're speaking to a whole different sector of people, and I think that is and you're speaking some really and I guess really just holding that space for other voices to come in right now. And I think that is that's really the work of our time. I think for certainly for allies and for settler folk and for white people, is just to just start to look at those blind spots, and where haven't we been listening, or where haven't we been thinking about the least of us,
yeah,
and this is yeah,
I
you
mean,
know
and I think in having these conversations, experiencing these conversations, for other people listening to them, for me, everybody, it's this reevaluation, right? It's seeing value where we didn't see value. There's so much diversity. It's funny because in some ways, we think about New Brunswick as not having diversity, and then when you do that microscope, it's so diverse. There's this
Hmm.
rich diversity in the Acadian community. There's Indigenous communities that are all different from one another.
Oh my
It's
gosh,
so
yeah.
cool. Like I think because for a long time I had this international view. I was into traveling. I lived in China. I
Hmm.
lived in Europe. My dad traveled. I was all about that. And then I started to go, well, wait, what if you take that same view and go and look real close
Hmm.
to you, and you start to see that there's this amazing, as you said, this richness that's all around us that we've for so long just gone, no, that's actually kind of in the way.
Right.
It's kind of,
We're gonna put that over here
yeah, it's
now.
actually kind of in the way of where we want to go, and that's kind of a pain. That's no. Whereas I really believe like it's actually where our strength lies. It's like in all these wonderful, amazing little pockets. And anybody who listens to you speak will realize that because you're such a great. I love you. I love how you speak. I love your ideas. I love your
I
thoughts, your
love you
brain, your
too.
music, man. It's wicked.
You're
So
wonderful.
yeah, man. So what's next? What's coming next? What's in the
That's a great
pipeline?
that's a great question. I think well, I tend not to build pipelines. It's
Okay.
against my
Yeah, what's in the creative pipeline? They're the
just
best
kidding.
types.
Yeah. Yeah, frig. So I really didn't want to put too much pressure on this time of like, okay, well, you got time now, so you better create something, you know? But I think inevitably I just having the time and space to do it, and trying not to put my pressure on it, but also realizing that like you might not get it again for a while. That was one thing that like after I put out the first record, it was like, they don't tell you that you should probably like make like 3 or 4 records before you release your first one, just in case something happens and it goes well.
Yeah. And then you
uh
don't have any time to do anything else.
yeah,
Yeah.
because then you're just touring, and for me there's a cycle to creation. It doesn't like happen in the same way. Whereas like for me, when I'm touring, I'm absolutely touring. I'm there to do a show and get as much sleep as possible and hydrate, and then do another show, and then that is my extent of my motion. And then when I'm resting, I'm absolutely resting. And for me, I guess the creative process too is kind of like this as well. It's like it kind of needs to be for me a choice to say like, okay, I'm sitting down and we're gonna do it like this now. And so I've been able to do that in this time, and I crafted 12 little songs together. um, I'm gonna work with a fellow named Owen Pallett to
Okay.
to bring them together, and
Wow.
create a little sound world around it. Such a wonderfully delicate musician, and I
Wow.
can't I
Yeah.
can't wait to collaborate.
Cool.
But also, yeah, like I was saying, like the stories and the languages are really what's keeping me most busy these days. Like, um, when I was going and doing that archival research for the first record, as I was mentioning, like there wasn't just songs that were collected. There was also photographs and stories, and the stories is like this huge piece of mystery to me that I really wanted to like. As I was saying, there's about 4 books, and so there's a whole dearth of literature that I think we could just blow all of this into. And the problem is like it was all collected in the early 1900s, and so it's in a writing system that isn't accurate to today's writing system. And so what I've been doing is like taking those stories and writing them out in our contemporary writing system so that it can be understood by our young people today.
Cool.
And so, but this is a lot of work because it's like volumes of stories.
Yeah.
So that's been my big work, but I'm also doing a couple of composition commissions. I just moved to Montreal, so trying to like live in a home is this is my first time living alone, so I'm like doing that old thing.
Yeah.
That's what's next for me. I'm really trying not to like I don't know when touring is gonna happen again or like when live shows are back. I don't know. Do you have a sense of what that looks like
I
on
know.
your
No,
end?
I think it's gonna be. I mean, it's gonna be a while. I'm just holding tight.
I just kind of
Holding.
shrug when people ask me. I'm like,
No, I got no sense. So I'm just trying to, I knew that I wasn't gonna survive if I tried to gear up and just go. I'm gonna tour. I'm gonna tour. I'm gonna keep it. I gotta find a different speed. We're in a different place.
yeah.
And it's about sustenance, maintaining a creative fire, maintaining good mental wealth. My thing is, I've limited in my household, my kids, my wife. Our goals are peace and harmony.
Yes.
Above all else, let's not get that's ambitious enough. Let's focus on peace and harmony,
Right.
and then we'll move from. And so that's the focus of the next year. that's
Just peace and
that's
harmony.
it. Yeah.
That's
So,
beautiful.
yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah.
oh man. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much for this.
It was such a pleasure. I
It's
feel like, let's hop on. Let's make it a weekly thing. Let's
oh, I
hop
love it,
on.
and I know there's been people who've been commenting and have been
Oh, really? Oh,
totally loving this,
okay.
and
Right
so
on.
thanks so much. Are there any organizations at home or in Canada that you want people to support? Any
Oh
organizations that
my
you want to draw
gosh.
some attention to? I know this is a lot of pressure, so don't worry
Yeah,
about it.
no, totally though. Oh my God, there's always like always organizations that I want to shout out. Depending on where you live, of course, but I know we have since we're both Fredericton boys, we both have a lot of connections to that place, and so I wanted to hopefully draw people's attention to something that's going on right now. I've been talking a lot about language. It's something very dear to me, and right now. In New Brunswick, we're talking about building the first Wolastoq language immersion school.
Amazing.
And so this is something that has not existed. And I think, we're right now, it's kind of interesting because, you think about the state of French right now in New Brunswick, and it's quite healthy, actually. And a school like École Sainte-Anne, it started as a schoolhouse with like 10 students,
Yeah.
and they built it up from such a small place. And so now we're talking to them, trying to get their playbook, seeing how they did it, and grow it, something like that. But anyway, so my mother has started a foundation, and so she's raising funds for this language immersion program that's gonna be going on. So if people wanted, a real tangible way to help out, our linguistic revitalization, then
Yes.
this would be a perfect way to do it. So and I'll type to you the
You
the
send
name
me
of
the
it.
link, and we'll put it right in the link on the YouTube link. So when people
Oh,
watch it,
cool.
because this will stay up on YouTube, so we'll put it up there, and people will be able to see it.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
that sounds good.
amazing.
It was so
Jeremy,
nice to chat.
thanks so much. Thanks. We'll talk to you
Okay,
soon. Take care.
take care.
Peace.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. Jeremy Dutcher he's amazing, is he not? He is such a special artist, special intellect. I love doing this. I learn so much. I love these conversations. I actually kind of forget we're doing this live on YouTube when I'm into it. I'm just so taken by the conversations. I hope you're enjoying them as much as me. I look forward to doing another one real soon. Enjoy the rest of the summer. Stay healthy, folks. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to yourselves. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.